Hey, well, welcome to the Jewish Road Podcast. My name is Matt Davis, and look who's here with me.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ron. I'm still here, still kicking.
Good. There's the vital sign check for us for today. And guess what? It's just you and I today.
Yeah?
We've had a lot of interviews and a lot of people coming in here and going out of here. And today, nobody wanted to talk to us, so it's just us here.
How do you feel about that?
Well, this is like just every other day. That's good. Hey, we want to talk about a couple things. There's a lot of movement. The world narrative is in about 1,000 directions. And what we want to talk about is Jewish identity. Who are we as the Jewish people? What is it that we believe about ourselves? But also, as everybody else is looking at us as the Jewish people, what do they see?
Yeah. Who do they say we are?
That's right.
Yeah.
So, interesting story. Marilee, my wife, she is picking up the kids yesterday from school, and literally right across the street from our house, there's somebody, a woman, on the corner, and she has a Palestinian flag draped over her shoulders. She's wearing a mask, and she's holding a sign up high above her head, very kind of crowded intersection there, and the sign says, "One Holocaust does not justify another."
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, right across the street from my house in Lexington,
From
Kentucky.
your house?
Yeah, from my house. This is not like even downtown Lexington. It's across the street from my house. Now, the story, if you hear that, one Holocaust does not justify another, if that needs explanation for you, the narrative that is out there right now is that what is happening in Gaza, Israel is decimating and annihilating the Gazans, the Palestinians who are there. They're murdering the children and the women and everybody, and to the point that it's become another Holocaust. That is the narrative out there.
Yeah. Well, that's the misinformation that's out there.
Yeah, and so the problem with all of this is that the story goes that Israel is the aggressor, Israel is the occupier, and really, what you see across the narrative across all the news channels and governments, and everybody is saying that we need a two-state solution. And I just keep banging my head against the wall because we've offered this.
Yeah. Well, didn't we even have a two-state solution supposedly in 2005 when
Yes.
we handed Gaza over to, who did we hand it over to?
Well,
group was that?
At that point, it was the Palestinian Authority.
Palestinians, yeah.
And so that, I mean, really, what people don't understand, and really, it's just a lack of knowledge of the history of the world. I mean, you put a shovel down in most parts in Israel, and you're going to find remnants of the Jewish people because that is our ancestral homeland.
Right, going back thousands of years.
But even there in northern Gaza, there were Israelis, there were Jewish people there in northern Gaza living there. And in 2005, the decision was made. Ariel Sharon says, we're going to get everybody up and out of here, and we're going to move you out of this Palestinian territory and into Israel proper. And here you go, Palestinians, you have a place that you can call your own.
And it wasn't with a lot of joy that the Jewish people relocated themselves.
A lot of resistance against their own government.
Yeah. Not only did the Jewish people leave, they dug up the graves of Jews who had died there and were buried, and brought those into Israel as well.
Right. And so this is not, and I'm not saying, well, they gave them that little chunk of land and that's it. I mean, this goes back historically. You have the partition plan in 1947 all the way through Arafat. There were jokes made that he just said no. He was getting pulled into the negotiating room, but this story of we need land has been part of the narrative. And now today in self-defense, because there was an attack on October 7th, and 1,200 plus Jewish people and Arabs were killed there in southern Israel along the Gaza envelope. In its own defense, it's interesting to me. Israel's retaliating, and there are I don't know if you saw the report, but we have 136 hostages that are still in Gaza. But even New York Times, they reported today that Israeli intelligence believes that 20% of those are confirmed dead. So 20% of those 136 are dead. And they believe on top of that, there's even another 20 that are dead beyond that.
Yeah, so 30 to 50 people are not there.
Yes.
Yeah.
30 to 50 of these 136 that are remaining while while there are negotiations with Qatar and everybody else of like, there'll be a ceasefire if we get all the hostages back. We'll give you the hostages back if we get a ton of, Palestinian prisoners released. There's all of this stuff going on. And in the midst of it, Israel is trying to eliminate the enemy who happens to be hiding behind their own women and children.
Yeah. And everybody forgets the fact that there was a ceasefire on October 6th.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden, the whole trajectory of the entire world changed the next day.
Yeah, and I would say that war is an ugly and horrible thing. But you even look at, from a United States perspective, we just had 3 soldiers that were killed a week ago, 2 weeks ago, in Jordan. And after 165, 170 attacks on our soldiers and bases, all
Syria and Iraq,
all over the Middle East, we have all of these attacks that were intended to kill our soldiers that were just not successful, but they brutally injured and maimed, and we have guys who are still in critical condition, but they finally had an attack that was successful from their point of view, killed 3 of our soldiers, and what are we doing? We are going after them, and we are attacking. Right? And there is a retribution, there is a retaliation because there's been life that's been taken, and we want to stop the evil. That is what Israel is trying to do.
Right. And there has never, I can't think of any other time in history where a country has been attacked, and then for defending themselves, they have been told they need to back off and cease fire.
Right. So Here's where we want to get off, because we could go on this for a long time, and we've probably already talked about enough of this. But what I think is important, where we want to go with this today, is this idea of Jewish identity, that the story and the narrative, it's kind of interesting that we are living in this time that you've been talking about. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, you said this country, this world is going to hell in the handbasket. And now you can say, I was right.
You said that when you were a little kid?
Yeah, I remember when mom was nursing me, I was 1 year old, just took my first steps, and this is the stuff that you're telling me.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I think I was trying to get into you the fact that you can believe in Jesus and be Jewish, and because you saw part of the family wasn't and part of the family was, and just you were massively confused, as opposed to me. I didn't have that problem growing up because we didn't have Jesus.
Yeah, so let's talk about this, because there are a couple of perspectives. If the narrative and the story about the Jewish people in the world today, we start to see the fruition of this. It's really this old and ancient hatred. We have the 1930s and the 1940s where the whole world shifted, and we thought, man, I think I grew up in this confidence thinking, well, that's never going to happen again. It was so awful, and there's so much history that the world will never turn on the Jewish people again, which that's what I thought, and that's what I believed, even against the backdrop of what I know to be biblically true.
Yeah.
But still, we have this narrative against the Jewish people, and so the Jewish people are trying to figure out what's going to happen to us. There's a longing for the Messiah to come, and we're trying to figure out who are we. And really our only hope in all of this, for believers, for followers of Jesus, and for the Jewish people, is that we need the Messiah to come.
Right.
That he is Sar Shalom, Yeshua Sar Shalom, our salvation, our Prince of Peace.
Mm-hmm.
That is our only hope through all of this.
Right. And that's a very difficult prospect for Jewish people even today. Although there are more Jews in the world who now believe that Jesus is the Messiah, it was always it's been very difficult. It is now, and it was for me growing up.
Yeah. So you grew up in your parents grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home.
Yeah, they were both from Orthodox families.
And what does that mean for somebody who doesn't know what that means?
Well, I mean, they were conversant with scriptures, with the traditions of the synagogue and of Jewish life. They kept kosher. I grew up, my parents grew up in that, and then the first few years of my life, I had that as kind of a backdrop to who we were, but we kind of moved away from that to more conservative Judaism. And so we were like that. And then when we left New York, everything changed. So, you know, at some point, we all have to connect with the Jewish Jesus.
Yeah. So you moved from New York to California, and you would say that you moved from your parents, your grandparents we went from Orthodox to conservative. What's the difference between those two, you would say?
Well, actually, when the Jewish people came to America, I mean, almost all of them were Orthodox. It was Orthodox Judaism, but a lot of them reacted to that and didn't like the Orthodox Judaism, so they kind of went the other way, and that created Reform Judaism. Everybody thinks it went from Orthodox to conservative to Reform, but a lot of people didn't like the Orthodox and didn't like the Reform, and that's what created the conservative Judaism in the middle.
It's kind of in between.
Yeah, middle ground. And that's kind of where we were. So, that's kind of the life I grew up in. But once we left New York and we moved to sunny Southern California, I always like to say that we immigrated from Brooklyn to the United States. But we came into California when I was still a young kid in elementary school, and a lot of the Jewish people made that trek out west also. So we kind of had a built-in Jewish community, but it wasn't predominantly Jewish in our neighborhood like it was in New York.
Right. So you go to synagogue sometimes. You went to Hebrew school. You had your bar mitzvah when you were 13. But your identity as a Jew, it was more ethnic. I'm Jewish rather than a religious practice that was part of your everyday life.
Right. God was not really a part of it. Just our ethnic identity was more part of it. And so when I was presented with a credible witness regarding the claims of the messiahship of Jesus, of Yeshua, that I had to seriously consider, I was able to look at the Bible in a way that I never had as if I had never read it before, which I hadn't. And that witness, actually, I should say, came from my mom. She became a believer before me, and we, as a result, I was not overwhelmed by a lot of religious doctrine and tradition, but in considering these claims of the messiahship of Jesus from a prophetic word out of the Old Testament, I was really looking to understand and discern God's heart and His message to us. So I was struck with the sense of this prophetic message was as I read it, and the thing that was read to me out of the Scripture was Isaiah 53, the 53rd chapter of Isaiah, and when I saw that, there was a sense that there was somebody outside of our time domain that was giving us this information, and it was, wow, if all of this is true, what does it mean?
Well, and for the Jewish people, this is another brand or category or flavor of Judaism, right? This does not fall into the Orthodox, the conservative, the Reformed. Jews just simply don't believe in Jesus. The second that you believe in Jesus, you've broken the Jewish mold, the category. It puts you outside of the Jewish category, and now you're no longer Jewish, you're now a Christian.
Right. And so, what do I have to do, having come to this conclusion? I mean, I'm Jewish. Do I have to join a church? Luckily, my first, year of understanding and learning the Scripture at that point was through a Jewish group, Shalom Scripture Studies, that set me on a journey to understand the Jewish Jesus, and that Jewish road that just leaped off the pages of both the Old and the New Testaments. When I finally looked at the New Testament for the first time, I looked at Matthew 1:1, and the first verse of the New Testament said that this is the record of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And I looked at that and I said to myself, if that's not a Jew, I don't know who is.
Right. So we have Jewish people are looking at people like you who are Jewish, but you now believe in Jesus. What'd you call yourself back then? Jewish Christian, Hebrew
Well,
Christian, completed Jew?
Yeah. Back in the 70s, we were Hebrew Christians. Messianic Jewish movement hadn't really taken off yet.
Right. So this identity keeps getting kind of pricked at, and we're trying to figure out, well, who are you now that once you believe in Jesus? But really, the Jewish thought towards us has always been, well, you're no longer Jewish. You're
Right.
now in the other category, right?
You switch jerseys.
Right.
You join the other team.
Right. So, we try to say this, and I think what people love about the TV show The Chosen is they get to see Jesus in his Jewishness. And most Jewish people don't realize just how Jewish Jesus was, and neither do most Christians, right? Like looking at Jesus, we've stripped him of his Jewishness.
Yeah. As far as growing up Jewish, coming from New York and then living in California, there was not a sense that Jesus was Jewish. I mean, I had Christian friends when we finally got to California. A lot of them were Catholic, and it seemed to me that I had more in common with my Catholic friends than the Protestant friends. But of course, that was probably because when I peeked into my friend's church, it was filled with all of what seemed to be the tradition for them, like we had tradition for us.
Yeah.
And so, they had candles all over the place. And I said, well, we have candles. And it looked at the front of the wall, and there was a giant cross with a man on it. And, that wasn't for me, but we had our ark with the Torah in it in the front. And there was a certain ritual life that they had and we had. And so we kind of got along, and we didn't ever delve into religion at all.
Right. So speaking of religion, there's been a big change now, let's say over the last, couple generations, 40 years. And we have fewer and fewer young Americans that want to have anything to do with organized religion. The study that came out 10 years ago was that the rise of the nuns, not N-U-N-S, the nuns who like Julie Andrews and Sound of Music, not those nuns, but
Right.
the nuns of people who have no religious affiliation whatsoever, that middle is growing. And what we've seen is that there's just been an exodus. There's a lack of trust in institutional, organized religion, and people just don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, they have been leaving religion in droves. I mean, for the most part, children, and especially grandchildren of my generation, that have basically abandoned Christianity, and the same is true for the Jewish people. They've abandoned Judaism to the extent that churches are shrinking in attendance, the same is happening in the synagogue. And it's not just a matter of people being too busy to attend services. I mean, there's a deeper reason for all of this. I think there's an exodus from organized religion that's taking place for some good reasons, and the Jewish people are making an exodus from the synagogue. I think people are really looking for meaning and purpose in their lives, but they don't find it in religion, and especially now this generation. I mean, my grandparents were immigrants into the United States, came through Ellis Island. They came legally. And, we settled in Brooklyn, and we lived our lives there. I think Jewish people find that the messages that are being preached today are, just really kind of watered down and feel-good philosophy, and they don't contain the things that they think are needful in their lives for the culture that they're living in now. It's a different culture.
Yeah, I just worked with a Jewish group trying to reach out to Jewish youth. They're not believers, but the idea is that they are calling the younger Jewish generation to come back to the way, because many of them have just gotten burned out on the whole thing, and they're saying, come back, and we want you to know that there can be a rich life that is walking with Mashiach, that is walking with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
But most youth are not feeling that. They look at their parents and their grandparents, and they're saying this is dry, this is ritualistic, this is organized, and it's the same thing over and over again in Hebrew.
Yeah, and in addition to that, we have a whole generation growing up that has been brought to a place in our culture and in our country of affluence and maybe apathy, and has really assimilated, and so that any kind of connection to God has been dismissed or at least numbed here. So it's not the same.
Yeah, well, the Jewish people have always been the people of the book. We've been the writers, the authors of the book, but also the keepers of the book. And we've gotten away from that. And it's not only the Jewish people, it's the people in the churches. We just don't look or read or study the Bible like we used to. We don't read it like we used to. When we read it, we're looking at it through our own lens, of our own cultural bias. So it's a very American story. How does this impact me? Rather than what was going on here, what's prescriptive and what's descriptive, that we, one of those topics that we talk about in seminary. But really, going into the beginning of the 20th century, most Jewish people were Orthodox, right?
Yeah, well, they were. I mean, my grandparents were Orthodox coming over here. And that was the case for most Jews. As I said, my parents grew up in an Orthodox home. They grew up in a kosher home. But today, about 15% of the Jewish people are Orthodox. Most of them are who remain Jewish, the people, they hold on to secular values. Very few of their children attend synagogue. So for me, this return to the Jewish Jesus came through my introduction within the Messianic Jewish movement, and it was there that I was able to begin putting together pieces of the puzzle of my own spiritual journey, and I discovered that there were people who loved Jesus and who also loved being Jewish.
So we have this exodus of the Jewish people coming out of the synagogue. They don't want to be a part of it. We have an exodus of Christians coming out of the church, not wanting to be part of that. But in these last days, I think that God wants to do something else, not just with the church, but with the Jewish people who have been part of their synagogues. And really, the whole reason we started this whole thing was we want to help Christians understand the Jewishness of Jesus and the Jewish roots of their faith. But it's not just to end it there. If all we did was just to help Christians make sense of the Old Testament and connect some of this stuff, their roots, that's not it has to be so that they can reach out to the Jewish people so that they can make sense of their Jewish Messiah.
Right. So the Jewish people can make sense out of Jesus. We never had any problem holding on to our ethnic identity. Even I held on to that, but Jesus was not a part of that ethnic identity. I knew he was Jewish, but the extent of my understanding was that a Jewish boy started a new religion, and he called it Christianity, and it was completely different from the values and traditions that we had. So after a while, there was no visible sense of Jesus the Jew. He didn't look Jewish at all anymore.
Right. And so part of what we're trying to do here is we have to put him back into his Jewish garb.
Yeah. From the time I was a kid, when I was very young, my mother told me, with regard to Jesus, he's not for you. And so, as I grew up and, grew older and moved out of high school and college, and, those words always rang in my ears, he's not for you. And so, my ethnic identity was solid, and it was solid separated from Jesus, who is the Jewish Messiah.
Yeah. So you started looking, and the one character in the Bible that you talk about all the time, is Joseph. Why is Joseph an important figure for us in this conversation?
Well, I think Joseph, represents such a picture of, what God's intent is in terms of bringing a redeemer to his people. And I believe in these last days, God wants to do something else with the church and the Jewish people. And so, as you said, we want to help Christians better understand the Jewishness of Jesus and their roots in the faith, so they can help Jews understand and make sense out of Jesus. But that means we have to put him back into his Jewish garb. For the longest time, I didn't recognize Jesus as a Jew because he didn't look Jewish anymore. And as I have gone through and studied and even taught in the life of Joseph, there was a point when Joseph was sold into Egypt by his brothers. He became, pretty much a slave in Egypt until he was brought up to be second in charge under Pharaoh. And, for a long time, I didn't recognize Jesus as Jewish, but there's an incident that happens when there's a famine in the land and Joseph's family have to come from Canaan into Egypt to get food. And Joseph sees them coming in. This is 20 years later, and he recognizes them, but they don't recognize him.
Right, because he's not wearing his coat of many colors, right? He is now, he looks Egyptian. He no longer looks Jewish.
He probably had a headdress. He probably had makeup on. He spoke Egyptian.
Right.
He didn't look Jewish at all, and so they didn't recognize him. And, we have the same problem Jewish people do when they look at Jesus. He does not look Jewish anymore.
Right.
And so that, becomes a major problem for Jewish people to recognize the Jewishness of the one who came to redeem them. And, Joseph had a new name. He had new clothes. He just looked different. And so he was, just like Jesus looks different to us as Jews, Joseph looked different to his brothers. He was unrecognizable.
Okay, but there are a lot of parallels between who Joseph was and Jesus when we look at the typology of Joseph, right? So there are a few things that stand out. Number one, Joseph, we find that he is the shepherd of his father's sheep.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We see him in Genesis 37, and he's out there and he's tending to the flock, and he's out there, and Jesus makes some statements. He says, I am the great shepherd, right? And he says, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. They know my voice.
Yeah. And he was actually being sent to find his brothers when they saw him. He was the favorite son of his father, and the brothers knew it. And when they saw him coming, he was just going out to check on him and report back to his father, and they hated him and they wanted to kill him.
So he was betrayed by his brothers.
Interestingly, they wanted to kill the only one who would be able to redeem them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's another type there in Joseph, in the life of Joseph. And, from that point on, he was, as we said, he was taken into Egypt. And it wasn't until, much later in the story that he and his brothers were reunited when they recognized him and who he was. And all the things that were prophesied came true. And the same is going to happen with our Messiah, Yeshua. Ultimately, he is going to return, but there's going to be very difficult times. And the Jewish people, in the process of that, I believe, are going to look toward him. Zechariah tells us that they are going to look unto him whom they have pierced, and they're going to mourn for him as one mourns for an only son.
You have this really incredible, tense scene that takes place, I think is at Genesis 45, where the brothers are there and they're standing there in front of Joseph, and Joseph is able to pick them out. He knows, he recognizes this gangly crew of men, the ones who betrayed him, and he sees his brothers, he knows his brothers, and his brothers are looking at him, and they don't know who he is. They don't know that within the power of his command, his voice, that they will be saved. But so they don't reach out and they don't call to him.
No, they don't know who he is. They first get an inkling when they have been sent back to their father Jacob, and then they have to go back to Egypt. And when they come back to Egypt with the things that Joseph required of them, namely bringing Benjamin. He ordered them to come in and dine with them, and he set them around the table in their birth order. Which, how would we know that? And it was shortly after that he divulged himself and said to them, "I'm Joseph, your brother."
Yeah.
And so it's going to be the same thing. I think Yeshua is going to come back one day, and he's going to say, "I'm Yeshua, your Messiah."
Yeah, he's going to sit down the 12 tribes, and he's going to say, I'm the one that you did not recognize. Not only am I the one who was going to come, but I also came. And it's going to be that point where our Jewish people are going to finally recognize their Messiah.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Our friend David Hofbrand wrote a really great book on the Jewish Jesus, and just a short quote from his book. He says, "We've inherited this revised picture of Jesus, so we don't really question it. We need to uncover the original and true representation, because if we want to know, present, and represent Jesus properly, it's vital that our picture of him is accurate. It's not a matter of adding a layer of Jewish culture, but of uncovering a truer picture of Jesus."
Oh, that's good. Good job, David.
Yeah, that's David.
Yeah.
David Hofbrand.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And I think that is what we in the church, those who are already followers of Jesus, that is what we need to be doing, is we need to set Jesus into his proper context. It is a revealing of who he really is. It's one of the reasons that right now in this season, we're going throughout all over the place, and we're talking about Messiah in the Passover. We're talking about this final Passion Week and who Jesus reveals himself to be, even to the disciples in this Passover meal. But this is the role of the church in these last days, is to be able to reveal Jesus for who he is.
Yeah, and that is definitely what has to happen. And in order to do that, we have to have an accurate picture of who he is. It's interesting. One of the things that we need to resist doing is contextualizing the gospel for the Jewish people. Paul already contextualized the gospel for the Gentiles. We don't really need a recontextualization of it for the Jews. We just simply need to restore it. And as David Hofbrand has said, uncover the truer picture of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason that we want to make sure that this is clear is that today our people are missing it. And it's not just painful to watch what is happening in Israel today. It's not just painful to look at the accusations that are being thrown out there, to see people across the street from my house that are saying that the Holocaust is happening again, and that one Holocaust doesn't justify another. But the heart cry is for our people to know their Messiah, to recognize him now before he comes later. And if we can do that, to reveal who he is to the people, that the Messiah would be their hope, because there's coming a day where, though we might have confidence in the superiority and the power of the IDF and Israel and their intelligence agencies and all of the stuff that they have going for them now, it is not always going to be this way.
No. There is coming a day when so many nations are going to be gathered against Israel that they are not going to be able to win that battle, but the Bible tells us that the Lord will win that battle for them, in much the same way that he won it for them when they were coming out of Egypt at the Red Sea. So it's not as if God is unable to deliver his people. He delivers them constantly. But that is, we want to get the message through to the Jewish people that their Messiah has come and he's coming back.
Yeah. And so that is our heart. As we're going to wrap up here, that is the motive of our hearts in this season, is to be able to go out And I know that many of you are listening and you're thinking like, well, I need more of this. How do I do this? I don't know these connections. How do we reveal the Jewishness of Jesus? And I'd say that one of the best ways that we can do that is to do a Passover Seder, to walk through that Passion Week. And it really starts when Jesus gets on a donkey on the top of the Mount of Olives and he makes that descent down. And that Passion Week, he goes about proving that he is the Lamb who was worthy to be slain, eventually leading up to his death and Feast of First Fruits, his resurrection. But we get to tell that story over the course of a meal, and we get to share that with church communities, house groups, small groups, and we're really going all over the country. And so that would be a first invitation for people, because our Jewish people, they don't know Jesus in that context.
No, and they need to see him as he was revealed in type throughout the Old Testament. And, when I think maybe when we get that truer picture of Jesus, then we won't hear mothers saying so much, he's not for you.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you for listening. Here at the Jewish Road, we are trying to help Christians make sense of the roots of their faith. We're also trying to help the Jewish people make sense of Jesus. And if that is something that you have a heart's desire to do, you can reach out to us and you can say, hey, we'd love to have you come out. We'll be all over the country over the next couple months. And so if that's for a Passover Seder or just to teach a Sunday gathering or midweek gathering, we're happy to do that. We are also a 501c3 nonprofit. We're crowdfunded by a worldwide tribe of people who say, I love what you're doing, and we want to make sure that you can keep doing it. And so if you are led to be giving towards the ministry and the work and the things that we're doing, you can also go to our website, is thejewishroad.com. We have all the social media, Instagram and Facebook and all those fun things, and you can find us there at the Jewish Road as well. So thank you for listening. Our hearts are with you. Our hearts are in the Middle East, and we are praying for peace for our people. We say, Sha'alu, Shalom, Yerushalayim.
Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Shalom.
Shalom.